Hello. Today I'm joined by Colorado House District 10 Representative Dr. Junie Joseph. Representative Dr. Junie, thank you so very much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you. You're welcome to just refer to me as Junie or
Okay.
Representative Joseph. I have a Juris Doctorate, and we do not call ourselves doctor, but thank you for the honorific.
Okay, I just wanted to be respectful for you.
Thank you.
Um, okay, so Junie, CU Boulder students have started a petition calling on the university to end its contract with Keyline Airlines because the company also contracts with ICE. As someone who got your law degree from CU Boulder, what's your reaction to students taking this stand?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just so proud of the students at CU Boulder. I got my start there as well too. I was a law student when when I ran for city council and I won. So we know that CU students are very civic minded, and they care deeply about the community and they care deeply about how CU is seen and perceived outside. So I am proud of them for doing this work. I'm proud of them for running this petition. And I think it is the right thing. I think in 2026, when we know that our community members are being snatched on the streets by masked men, and we know that it takes an entire system for this particular situation to get as bad as it is, and it could certainly get worse. And I think those students are asking for accountability, and I think it is fair, and I think it is right. And when you think of the Holocaust, when you think of slavery, it was an entire system of thousands of people who benefited from that system, right? There were people who were chartering boats who were part of the slavery system, right? And chartering people across the world to sell them. So it was an entire system. And when you think of the Holocaust, it was the same thing. And I think what the students are saying, enough is enough. And they want their university to be accountable and say that we will not contribute to the system that allow and help President Donald Trump to kidnap our community members off the streets and to send them to foreign countries. That's what these planes do. They pick up people and send them to countries where they don't even speak the language. And I don't know the inner workings of Key Lime. And I just hear that they provide that type of service. And the students at the university said they don't want that. And I think that's fair for them to say so.
So, CU Boulder Athletics released a statement saying their contracts are awarded through a competitive bidding process and they don't request that contractors disclose other business relationships unless relevant to capacity and competency. The contract runs through 2028. Do you think the university's contracting guidelines should be updated to consider a company's other client relationships, particularly contracts with federal immigration enforcement?
I have heard this line of conversation before, and as an attorney, I understand. If CU were to break this contract at this moment, they could face a lawsuit,
Mm.
and it could bring them to court for years, and they may have to pay much more. So that's probably could be what they're thinking is that, hey, we have to pay. If we break this contract, we will have to find a new contractor and we will have to go to court and we will have to pay. And they're probably considering all of that. But also, the question, I guess, for CU, whatever decisions they choose to make, is that in 2026, we have to try to live our values. We can't say that we are about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and contributing to systems that disenfranchise and marginalize people. And I think that's what CU has to think about because every decision that we make requires sacrifice. We have to decide, are we the university that welcomes students from all over the world and care for them and want them to feel safe in our campus? And if we were that university, then we may have to sacrifice this particular contract. But then again, part of the conversation is if we were to look at if truly corporate responsibility was in every contract, it might be very, very difficult for a university or anybody to do contracts, right? So the conversation is that we just have to decide what are some of our biggest values. And based on those, we can reevaluate some contracts. But if we decide that we were going to evaluate every contract, it would be very, very difficult to keep the university running.
Mhm. So, beyond the petition, what concrete actions can CU Boulder students take to pressure the university to reconsider this contract? What avenues do they have, either through the university system or legislatively?
Yeah, that's a great question. The legislative session has already started, so this session may not be possible to do anything about what's going on at CU. But I remember last year there was a colleague who brought a bill around divesting state funds or the state from doing contract with certain companies. Maybe that might be something that we may think in the future is that as a state and within the purview of the state, which companies that CU should be able to do business with. But then again, we also want CU to be able to be free in doing its work, to have its own independence. But
Mhm.
at the same time, I think that's a community conversation. I hope that they will be able to resolve that as opposed to requiring legislation to tell them, hey, you need to work with these partners as opposed to these other partners. You want people to do the right thing on their own as opposed to forcing them to do the right thing.
Mhm. So, as a state legislator,
Mhm.
is there any role for the Colorado General Assembly in addressing situations like this, where public universities contract with companies that also work with ICE? I think you kind of just touched on that just a
Yeah.
moment ago.
Yeah, I do think we could pass legislation that says that, public universities should not work with private companies that also work with ICE. But we know that we are dealing with a lawless federal government at this particular juncture. And hopefully within the next 2 years, this administration will, it's going to be a new administration. And some of those lack of accountability and transparency that we see today are not things that we will be dealing with in the future.
So, Junie, while I have you, I would like your legal insight on what we're seeing nationally. Um, we've seen reports out of Minnesota and other states where ICE operations are affecting American citizens. As an attorney, can you walk us through what's happening and why it's concerning from a constitutional perspective?
Yeah, it's very concerning to see what happened in Minneapolis, in Chicago, in California. You have the federal government or the executive branch deploying essentially the military into our streets. We are Americans, and that system, unless there is a national disaster or natural disaster, most people in their lifetime have not seen military being deployed on their streets, the National Guards. We usually don't see that. And I think the president deploying ICE in our streets to attack, to murder, or community members is very concerning. We are Americans. We have free speech. We have the right to protest that is enshrined in our Constitution. And for people to be gunned down in the street, that is unconstitutional and that is wrong. And I hope that when there is a new administration, they will look into these murders and take actions.
Now, there are reports of people being detained or questioned while attending protests or even religious services. We have Don Lemon and other reporters being arrested for simply doing their jobs and reporting on protests that just so happen to be at a church. How does this impact First Amendment rights to assembly and free speech.
Yeah, for sure. It curtails all rights to free speech, all right to exist, all right to engage with one another. Again, the idea is that as Americans, we have the right to assembly. We have the right to go and march in the streets. But I think now, out of fear, people afraid to go out there, they don't feel protected. The federal government is looking at everyday American citizens and seeing us as enemies of the state. And all these actions are eroding the rule of law in our states. And that's unfair. And I think it's important that Americans continue to march, regardless of the fear of the current president. And every opportunity that I have, I speak on it as well, because it will take each and every one of us to continue to go out there, to continue to march, and to continue to fight for one another. And yes, there is a possibility that when we are marching out there, we may be gunned down by a federal agent. But that's the price that we are willing to pay for one another, for our own freedom, because we cannot just take this laying down, because when the history books are written, we don't want to be known as the people who went on with our lives and allowed our neighbors and our friends to be snatched on the street and trafficked in other countries and turned over to countries that have no human rights. That is unfair and that is unjust.
Now, the case of Alex Pretti has become a flashpoint in debates about constitutional rights. Pretti was a 37-year-old ICU nurse who was legally armed with a concealed carry permit while observing and filming an ICE operation in Minneapolis. Video evidence shows he was recording on his phone, protecting a woman who had been pushed by agents, and his gun remained holstered throughout the encounter. Yet he was pepper sprayed, tackled, disarmed, and then shot at least 10 times by federal agents while on the ground. As an attorney, how does the Second Amendment protect Americans' right to bear arms lawfully? And what does it mean constitutionally when someone is killed by federal agents for simply possessing a legal firearm they never drew?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a great question. And to your point, he had a gun. It's unfair. It's unfair what happened. He should have never been killed. And just because someone has a gun, he did not present a danger to these officers. He should not have been killed. And I do believe, oftentimes you hear the Republicans say that Democrats are curtailing their rights to their Second Amendment rights. Yet they had no qualms to shooting a man who presented no danger to them and to blame it on the fact that he had a gun on him. That is so unfair. And I do believe the fact that they shoot and kill that man, it definitely impact or make people fear carrying their own guns. It make them uh, fear that they could be killed at any moment by the federal government because they're carrying their gun, which is lawful in this country. And Second Amendment rights is a sacred rights that is enshrined in our Constitution. So for him to be gunned down that way, to me, was just so hypocritical of the Trump administration.
So here's a follow-up question to that. Some have tried to paint Pretti as violent, pointing to him kicking an ICE vehicle's taillight at an earlier protest, or claiming he didn't have proper ID for his firearm, even though he had his concealed carry permit on him. And Minnesota law treats not having a permit as a petty misdemeanor with a maximum $25 fine. From a constitutional and legal perspective, how should we understand the proportionality of force here? Kicking a tail light or a potential $25 fine versus being shot 10 times.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. To your point, even the law regard not having your concealed permit on you as a petty offense, $25. And even kicking a tail light in itself, that in itself should not have led to his murder, does not justify his murder. Not having your, that should be up to the court. That was an extrajudicial killing of a protester on the street. That is so wrong. That's against human rights for that to have happened to him. So at the end of the day, there is no justification. It really doesn't matter what the Trump administration says at this point.
Hmm.
Not to me, I will never, never accept this as anything other than a murder.
Hmm.
Yes, when we put it in this term, oftentimes it should be a killing by the federal because these terms are different, right? When you say murder and killings, it's too different, right?
Hmm.
But at the same time, the fact that there was no justification for him to be killed in the street in the way that he did.
Hmm.
Not because he did not have a $25 certificate on him, not because he kicked a tail light. Who cares about a tail light? It's a
Hmm.
life. A life was taken because the federal government just wanted to, they want to prevent us from going out there and supporting our community members and also decrying the bad behaviors that are happening in our streets. That's what this was all about. Having white people standing up for black and brown people.
Hmm.
That's what it was about. For me, when I look at what happened, it's saying to other people that if you go out there and you fight for your fellow humans, black and brown people, we will treat you just like them. Because black and brown people have been killed many, many times on the street. Our
Hmm.
lives are not protected. But if
Hmm.
you're a white person and you decide that you are going to go out there and stand up for black and brown people, we will treat you just like them.
Hmm.
Here's the example. Preeti was one of them, and so was Miss Good.
Hmm. So we're hearing about warrantless searches and checkpoints. Can you break down how the Fourth Amendment is supposed to protect Americans from unreasonable searches and what we're seeing that potentially violates that?
Yeah, due process. And that's the issue. People are being searched. Federal government are searching people's cars, going into people's houses without warrants. It's lawlessness. It's those issues that will have consequences for years to come, if not centuries. It's an unfair system. And no one is safe at this point. No one feels protected under our current president.
When American citizens are detained or questioned without access to attorneys or proper process, how does that violate Fifth Amendment due process rights? You touched on it just a little bit with that question.
Yeah, I mean it's so it all depends on context, right? When it comes to immigration, it's a civil matter. And because it's a civil matter, you're not entitled to an attorney.
Mm,
So that itself present its own challenge.
mm,
In criminal matter, it's very different. If the person requests an attorney, the law enforcement has to stop. If they say they don't want to talk anymore, the officer would have to stop. But in immigration, because it's a civil matter, they tend to they use disproportionate force again. An immigrant, whether they cross the border, you may say, yeah, they violated immigration law, but nonetheless, that's a civil matter. It's not a criminal matter as we understand criminal matters.
mm. And final question. What should Coloradans and Americans generally know about their rights if they encounter ICE? And what should people be doing right now to protect civil liberties?
Yeah, this one is a very tough question. And the reason why it is so tough is because of uh, the separations of the different branches of government, and also it's a federal issue. Immigration is a federal issue. There are very, very few recourses out there. We at the state legislature have passed laws to require non-cooperation between our state agencies and municipalities and counties with the federal government. But nonetheless, because it's federal law, they are essentially just lawlessly running through our communities. And it's unfair. They are unchecked because of check and balance. And it's hard. What do I say to community members if they encounter ICE? It's the things that you do before that, right? I am an American. I carry my passport with me. I have a passport card. I have a passport book. I
Mm,
leave the passport book at my house, but under the Trump administration, I carry it with me. So
mm,
I would say to any American who has an accent, who's black and brown, to carry a passport card with you, but that doesn't mean you will not get arrested under this lawless administration. You're likely to be arrested. I probably could be arrested as well. And that's a reality at this point. And also stay connected with different groups in your community. Uh, Stay connected with churches and also not traveling. I know it's not fair to say to an American person or to our community members to not travel to certain communities or certain areas, but at this point, to keep people safe is to say, hey, if you know this area to be more conservative, is to not travel in that area so that you don't have to deal with some of these challenges. Because once someone is arrested and find themselves in the system, it's hard to get them out of it, right?
mm,
I've heard of community members who have been picked up by ICE and it's taken months and months and months. And sometimes it takes judicial opinions to get them out. And as you know, with several high-profile cases, people have been transported out of this country to
mm,
foreign countries they've never been to.
mm,
So there is that. So at this point, it's very hard to keep the federal government in check. Recently, I passed me and a couple of colleagues, we've worked on on a resolution to demand accountability when it comes to ICE, to also require that the federal government do more work to bring forward reform to our immigration system so that we don't have to have ICE running rampant on our streets. But at this point, President Trump has both the House and the Senate, and it's very unlikely that we will see any reform until both chamber changes and we have an elected president who is a Democrat. And even then, the hope is that we will hold Democrats' feet to the fire because we are where we are because both Democrats and Republicans are complicit to what we're seeing. And it's easy to blame Donald Trump for all our problems, but
mm,
we are also part of the reasons as to why things are the way that they are. You know, people get elected as Democrats and they are in the majority and they make so many promises to their constituency. And then when they get to Washington, they forget who they work for, whether
mm,
they work for the people or for corporations. And
mm,
I think that's why we are where we are. And I hope in 2028, the electors and the electorate will hold uh, these elected people to a higher standard and demand a president who will fight for reform, for immigration reform in our country. And I hope that things doesn't get worse, but at this point things are pretty
mm,
bad because you have Americans who are being gunned down in the streets for kicking a tail light and not having a $25 certificate on them. That should have been, hey, here's a court summon and go to court and speak to a judge. That's not what happened in that instance. What happened, Mr. Pretti lost his life because the federal government decided a $25 certificate and kicking a tail life deserve your life to be taken for something like that.
mm. Well, once again, Junie, I just want to thank you so very much for joining me and giving me your insight into these matters. And for those of you who are joining us, um, now more than ever, independent journalism is important. Um, just a like, share, a subscription, it's free. And it goes a long way in boosting this channel in the algorithm. So please consider doing those actions, and I will catch you later.